see that too well. But good evening, everyone. It's really good to be back. We had an awesome conference last March. We were, what was it, our 5th month of our marriage? So yeah, it was fairly new. And yeah, we had a great time, and we really appreciated the passion that you guys had for the gospel and for missions. And yeah, I just want to encourage you in that, and that was really neat to see. So today we're going to talk about our mission, what we'll be doing in the Philippines, and what we have been up to since we saw you last, and what our ministry has in the Philippines has done kind of since then as well, how it's progressed. So
we're doing a little bit of interactive stuff, so I hope that's okay. So this first one,
can't really see it.
It is hard to see.
Unfortunately.
You can kind of see it though. Is where in the world are we going? And there's different options up there for what could be.
You don't know what B is, but it's, oh, actually, you can see it on the back, on the TV back there.
Yeah.
It's slightly better.
Yeah, so that's the map.
So which country are we going to? A, C, D, or B?
Right. So if you think it's A, please raise your hand. Anybody think it's A?
Wow, very interactive. Good job, good job.
All right. B. Anybody think it's B? No. C?
Oh, we got
okay,
a couple.
we got a few. How about D?
Oh, we got a couple. That one seemed to be the winner, and that one is the winner.
That is correct.
That's the Philippines.
Good job.
D is Japan, or sorry, D is not Japan. D is, wait.
D is the Philippines.
Yeah, B is Japan. And then Malaysia and is, all right, sorry, I'm talking. Okay, carry on. Now, yes, so the Philippines. When I was raised in the Philippines, they would always, and my parents would always tell me, yeah, look, it looks like a old man sitting down with a cane. But now, more recently, someone said that it looks like a donkey, the silhouette of a donkey with the ears. So like right here is its ears, this is its mouth, this is its neck here. You see that? So that's a donkey, supposedly. You're like, all right, I don't see it. That's fine. So we will be ministering in this area right here in this green. That's the National Capital Region, a very populated area there. All right, so just a reminder, I'm a second generation missionary to the Philippines. My parents were missionaries there, and so I was born there and I was raised there, and I learned the Filipino language, well, one of them, the main one that's spoken in the country, and I learned the culture, which is still to this day a little bit odd at times, but so is the U.S., so what are you going to do? So I had the opportunity to experience just life as a missionary kid, and I really learned a lot about missions. So when I went to Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with a degree in studying missions, I really kind of combined culture of the Philippines and missions, and I really thought of pursuing missionary work. And so God used the blessing of being comfortable with the Philippines and learning a language and a culture to kind of get me into gear of, wow, like I really need to use these gifts that God has given me to be passionate about reaching the Philippines.
Mm-hmm. And some of you might remember that my path to missions was a little different. I grew up in Iowa. But the two pictures in there, one is the Great Wall of China, and one is a picture of my sister and I with my dad. My dad is disabled, so God used that to give me a heart for people who are disabled or people who are vulnerable. And then in high school, I went on a trip to China and worked with some kids with disabilities, and God kind of used that to cement that desire in my heart to help people who are vulnerable. And then through college, I worked at a summer camp, and I learned how to share the gospel. And those two things kind of combined because I realized I wanted to minister to people's souls, not just to their physical lives here on earth. And he gave me a heart for teenagers and reaching youth for the gospel. And so I went to school for social work, but I really wanted to use that to do missions work. And I didn't know it was going to be in the Philippines with Jordan, but God eventually showed me that that's what it would be. And yeah, so we're excited to do it together.
Very good. So these are a few pictures of the Philippines. We've got rural life here. This is in the mountains. This guy's carrying a pot of rice. He's in flip-flops, and this guy's barefoot. It's life. This is a resort. This is something that a lot of tourists would see. This is actually probably something a lot of tourists would see too. This is in Manila. This is the capital city. Probably not too far from where we'll live a little bit, unfortunately. But that's where a lot of the work is being done with what we're doing right now. So yeah, that's pretty typical traffic. That's one direction, by the way. The other side going the other direction is over here. So yeah, joyous traffic. So now to continue our interactive portion. How many islands do you think make up the Philippines? Shout it out. A bunch. So what is that, like 20? What do you think? 102. Yeah, this is kind of hard, but unless you just looked it up. Oh, you're looking it up. All right. The answer is 7,107. It's second, I think, in the world to Indonesia. Indonesia has like 14,000, but Philippines has 7,107 islands. I think it depends on if it's high tide or low tide. But yeah, this is a picture in the Philippines. There's about probably 30 right there, and most of the islands in the country are uninhabited. But yeah, so that is an interesting fact about the Philippines. Carrying on.
Yeah, what do you think the population of the Philippines is? Give it a guess.
Wow.
102 million.
Wow.
Did he cheat?
I don't know. 104.9 million.
That was such a good
as
guess.
of 2010. So that's probably more like 110 or 112 now, but impressive. Good job. So the Philippines is very densely populated. The actual land area, I would say, is about the size of the state of Arizona. So cramming that many people into a land area that size, it's very densely populated. Mm-hmm. The Philippines has a lot of people. They also have a lot of youth. And this is one thing that relates to the ministry that we're doing, because we will be working with youth. And 44% of the population of the Philippines is under the age of 18. The problem with that is that the evangelical churches that are in the Philippines, the population of evangelical church Christians would be about 12%. There are so many youth that aren't being reached. So those churches that I was talking about, even though a lot of them have youth all around them, I would say the populations of those churches are a lot. They don't have very many youth. And the reason for that is because of youth pastors. They aren't trained. They don't have the resources. They don't have the finances to pay a youth pastor. So typically, youth pastors aren't a thing. So you just have a youth leader. So if you have a youth leader, it's going to be hard to train up or to come up with a program week in and week out. Well, you say, well, why don't you just use a curriculum? There isn't a curriculum in the Philippines, except for, from what we know, ours. And American curriculums would be a little bit more expensive. So it's a challenge to reach the youth. And our friend who we're working with, Tom Dennison, and this is his wife, Sue, they've been missionaries in the Philippines for over 30 years. So he's got a lot of experience with youth and with ministry. He actually was, for a while, the director of Word of Life in the Philippines. And he recognized that point that I said earlier, that there are so many youth that aren't being reached. And so as a result of that recognition, he created this program here called Activate Youth Groups. And Activate is basically a youth curriculum that gives churches a resource to reach the youth that are in their communities. So it's basically doctrinal teaching. It's got daily devotionals and Bible memory packs for the students so that it can build a habit of being in the Word as well. But we also provide training for those churches. So we're not just giving this curriculum and leaving. No, we're giving them this curriculum. We're showing them how to use it, and we're equipping them in its usage. A little example of what that looks like. I'm sure I shared this last time, but this is a church that I did my internship with in 2017, and they are a great church. I actually grew up with this church when I was younger, so I knew a lot of the people there, but they did not have a youth group. They were a strong church with solid outreach, reaching people and baptizing people pretty consistently, but they didn't have a youth group. And the reason for that is because their youth pastor or youth leader in the past had gotten burnt out. They didn't have a resource. And so I came in there after doing some ministry for a while and recognized, I think we can use Activate there. And so we did, and I communicated and contacted some of the youth leaders, and we started one. And when I was there, we had around a dozen youth. And now, 2 years later, they usually have around 30. And that's our goal. Like, we don't want to say, hey, like, this is what we're capable of. No, like, this is a simple thing that gives theology so that we can equip you guys and you can do the rest and you can reach those youth that are nearby. And that was really neat to see that it's growing. And so the first point that Tom saw that I mentioned earlier was there's so many youth that need to be reached. 44%, remember, of the population's under 18. The second point of why Tom wanted to create Activate was this one, and Joci's going to talk about it.
Yeah, I like talking about this because I love seeing how God is working around the world and kind of like the big picture. So this picture is a picture of the 1040 window, which you're probably familiar with. They're pretty like missions-focused church. But in case you're not, it's just is that latitude or longitude? I always forget. What? Okay, so it's latitude. All right, thank you. Oh. So it's the latitude where the most unreached people in the world live. And if you remember from our little quiz earlier of where the Philippines is, right there, the little donkey head is right there. So the Philippines is within this 1040 window, but the Philippines is actually a reached country in this area of unreached people, which I don't think is an accident and I think is God's design. So in the Philippines, like, because the church is growing and doing well, they should be the ones reaching the people in Southeast Asia who have never heard the name of Jesus before. But very few are going. And part of that is because missions and international missions is just not at the core of the Filipino church right now. It wasn't, it's just like a theology that is kind of like missed. And it's probably because it's a new church. The church in the Philippines is like started growing in like the 70s. So it hasn't been around for very long. So the idea is with the Activate Youth curriculum, within that curriculum, like 20% of it is about the Great Commission and about missions, theology of missions, what it means to be a missionary, why God calls missionaries, like why we need to go, what's the importance of reaching the nations, so that those youth, as they grow up in the church, they will be the ones who will be going and sending. So if we can reach the youth with that message of how important it is to share the gospel with the world, as they become leaders in the church, that's the direction the church will continue to go. So kind of like building it from the ground up so that the people in Southeast Asia and in like these areas can be reached with the gospel. The cool thing is that Filipinos travel abroad often to work. So a Filipino going overseas, that's not a scary or hard thing for them. But to go with the mindset of like, I'm going to a mission field to share the gospel, that's the new idea. So we want to use the strengths that God has given the Philippines of being adaptable to go to different countries and learn languages. And we want to use those for the spreading of his kingdom. So we're really excited to be a part of like the beginning of that as well.
Yeah, another ministry of Activate is youth camp. I'm sure many of you have probably attended a youth camp, a summer camp one time in your life. And I would also probably venture to say that you were impacted by it, because I definitely was, whether it was working for the camp or just being in it. And camp in the Philippines is the same, because there's still a lot of fruit, a lot of people that have not necessarily even heard the truth of the gospel, and youth camp is a really good way to reach that. So when we were there in 2017, we held a camp, and even this past summer in the Philippines, Tom held a camp, and 140 campers came, and around 30 were saved, which is awesome. And a really cool thing about camp is the people that come are from the churches that use the curriculum. So they invite guests, and all of those guests are connected to that church. So they have a way, that they can continue to attend this church or get connected to something that's outside of camp. Because that, like, camp high, right? You go to camp, and then you feel like, wow, that was amazing, and then you leave, and it's like, oh, it's not as great. I think this is a really cool way to temper that a little bit. So that's one of our neat ministries, and we hope to be able to run that every year, and that's partially why, we'll talk about it later, but that's partially why our leave date is as soon as we can. So Joci is going to share a little bit about what we've been up to kind of specifically since we were with you guys last.
So last October, we felt convicted, I guess. We prayed about it, and we knew that we needed to start raising support full time. So we decided to trust God with our life and our finances, and we stopped working. We moved out of our apartment, and we've been living with friends and family since last October so that we can support Raise full time. So we've been traveling a lot. We've been spending time in Michigan and Iowa and Florida in particular, because we both went to school in Michigan. We have a lot of friends up there, and then I have family in Iowa, and Jordan's family is in Florida. So we've been traveling a lot, sharing at a lot of churches, meeting with a lot of people, sharing with them what we're doing, because we know that God already has in store who our support team is going to be and who's going to be a part of our ministry on this side, the side that's holding the rope for us. So we don't know who that is, so we're just trying to be faithful and sharing and meeting with people so that he can bring us together with the people who he has already designed for us to be a part of our team. So we've been doing that since October full time. It's been crazy, lots of ups and downs for sure. The song that we sang actually was really convicting to me about, do I praise you just when there's like all the good things, or do I praise you also when it's raining and there's storms? And with support raising, it's a lot like that. So that song was just a blessing to me, a reminder of praising God, even when it's hard. But we're planning on being on the field in October. That is our goal. That's what we're running towards, and we're trusting God to provide that for us. So, that's what we've been up to.
Yeah. So one thing I was going to mention earlier is just a little update about Activate itself.
Yeah.
I think we have, when we shared last time, we had around 20 churches that use our curriculum. Now there's 25. So it continues to grow. There's actually a school that is now, a high school that's now using our curriculum as well. We tweaked it a little bit. But that is one of a cool, neat opportunity. And right now, really neat opportunity is the possibility of leasing for basically free a camp property, which is a huge opportunity to reach and grow the ministry. Because if we can use this camp area and then even buy it, it can be a missionary training school for Tom. He wants to create a missionary training school. He wants it so that our camp, we don't have to pay as much to these other camps, and it can just be in-house. And eventually it would be amazing if our ministry was self-sustaining, so that we could rent this place out, and and the ministry workers within that can be self-sustaining and not rely on support from the United States or something. That's one of our goals. And so that's a huge prayer point at this point, actually. We just talked with Tom a couple weeks ago, and he said that they're looking at getting that camp area. And so that is huge. At this point, I do want to seriously encourage you guys to consider supporting us, whether that's in prayer. Prayer is, I'm starting to realize, so crucial to ministry. And we have many prayer requests, and we have a newsletter out there that you guys can sign up for and just join us in praying for our ministry and how it can continue to grow. But also support us financially. And at this point, we're 42% supported. Our one-time support is good. Our flights and visa and all that stuff, and even our car costs, that's basically covered, which is amazing. That's a big answer to prayer. But we are hoping, like if I just said 42% and you're like, you want to leave by October? Right. We want to leave by October so that we can run a camp in the Philippines in May. And if we don't, then we don't. But I think that would further the kingdom, and maybe that's not God's plan. But that's why we set the date as that, so that we can continue to pursue the ministry and work on that. So if you guys would consider that, that would be amazing. We really value our support team, and we want you guys to be a part of that. Like Joci was saying earlier, it's like, you're holding the rope for us as we go, and because we know that just as we have faith in going, you guys have faith in giving. So, yes, we have a few minutes of time for questions. If anyone has any questions or clarifying questions that they have for the ministry. Yeah.
Well, last year when you were here, you kept quizzing Joci on words that you would say then. So I wanted to know how you were doing in learning new
In Tagalog?
That's so funny. I forgot that you did that then.
all the time.
Yeah,
I still do that.
He still does that. I still am only social.
She has an app now that
Yeah.
she hasn't done as much.
I know
lately.
more than
She does
I
know
did
more.
then.
She probably knows 100 words, which is good. That's good. Sorry, that's good.
Yeah.
So she will be, actually I will be as well. Although I did learn the language growing up, I'll be studying with a tutor when I arrive so that I can, because imagine if you didn't study English at all in your life, like in school, and then you're trying to speak in public. I want to be respectful to Filipinos when I'm, sharing and stuff. So when I'm sharing at meetings with pastors and stuff, I have fluency in the language, but I want to get better. And so Joci will be studying to learn it in general, and that's going to be exciting.
I think also last time I was here, I probably only knew like 10 words. So,
Yeah.
so 100's doing all right, I think. Hopefully.
Any more questions? That was good. Good question. Yes. What was that? Dope? Oh, the drug situation? Yeah, you probably heard about the president over there. He's a little crazy. he had a war on drugs for a couple years, 2016 and 17 and 18, and a lot of people were killed, and it was an unfortunate situation. But from what I understand, drugs have mostly left the streets. And I think they'll probably come back because they've stopped the war on drugs. Yeah, it's a lot of the Christians out there are actually for this president, even though he just says, yeah, just kill them. They're mucking up our streets. It's obviously really heart-wrenching, but at the same time, he has cleaned up part of the country in a lot of ways. So it's a weird balance for a lot of the Christians there. So at this point, I think the drug situation is doing a little better, but it's probably just going to come back. That generally is what happens. Any more questions? Yeah.
What's the primary religion?
It's animistic Roman Catholic. Animistic Roman Catholic, when I say that, it's a combination of animism, which is the belief that all inanimate objects have souls, and Roman Catholics, so they worship idols and they don't believe in the true gospel. It's a very muddled works-based salvation. So a lot of the people, the evangelical church is trying to reach a lot of those, of that population. Mm-hmm. And then Islam is a small minority, but that's also there. I saw a question here, yeah. How different is the culture? It's pretty different. I would say it's becoming less different because the U.S. is influencing everywhere. So, social media and TV and, movies and everything, that's really influencing the rest of the world. So the Philippines is becoming kind of like that, the youth especially. But it's pretty different. They're not time-oriented. It's not that they don't care about people. Because for you, if you say, well, why aren't you respecting me when you're not showing up on time? For them, it's, I care about relationship more than I care about showing up on time or a goal or something like that. And so that's a big difference. They value time a lot. I would say more than the U.S., respect their elders a lot. It's a big family country. So when an elder comes into the room, the young kids or the relatives will go up to that person and they will take his hand and they'll put it towards their forehead as a sign of respect. And that's still done everywhere in the country. I think it's a neat custom. It just shows a respect for elders. So that's, I think, just a quick snippet of how it's different. So I think that'll be good for that. And I'm going to pray before we get started in Psalm 27. But before that, before we get started, let's pray. God, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for everyone here just being willing to grow in understanding of you. God, give us wisdom and knowledge so that we can continue to grow and seek you and seek others to seek you. God, let us understand tonight a little bit more about true hope. In your name, amen. All right, so Psalm 27 is a good psalm, and it is a psalm that the subtitle is the Lord, well, in my ESV, it's the Lord is my light and salvation. And we're going to read a few of the chunks of the chapter. We're not going to have time to go through all of it, but we're going to get the main ideas. And I hope it's an encouragement to you guys, because when I was going through it and learning about this chapter in Psalms, it was encouraging to me, especially in light of our support raising. So I'm just going to read verse 1. Psalm 27, verse 1. The Lord is my light and salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise against me, yet I will be confident. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and inquire in his temple. For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will lift me high upon a rock. And now my head shall be lifted up above my enemies all around me, and I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy, and I will sing and make melody to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. You have said, seek my face. My heart says to you, your face, Lord, do I seek. Hide not your face from me. Turn not your servant away in anger, O you who have been my help. Cast me not, forsake me not, O God of my salvation. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. Give me not up to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me and breathe out violence. I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. So this is one of the 73 Psalms of David. This is a song of confidence, of joy, and ultimately of hope in God. We don't know what's happening in David's life. It doesn't have one of those prescripts at this time, but it's clearly a trial, which a lot of these psalms are laments or describing a trial in David's life. Before we go into this song too far, I want to define confidence or what is hope. Ultimately, I want to define hope. So our culture defines hope in a way that is not biblical. Our culture defines hope as a wish or a dream, right? You would say that it's not really grounded in anything substantial. You would say, well, I hope I get an A on that test, right? Like that's come out of my mouth, I'm pretty sure. Or I hope I can get tickets to that concert, or I hope I can get that car, or I hope we can get that ... It's usually like getting something or something of that nature. But in the Bible, especially in this passage here, you can see that hope is not this kind of vague, like unsubstantial thing. It's something that is grounded in something solid. And so in the Bible, hope is the confident expectation of what God has promised. Hope is the confident expectation of what God has promised. And so the strength of biblical hope lies in the faithfulness of God, not anything that man has done. And I think that's really encouraging. Because we know that our hope is in God. And we have seen all throughout the Bible of what God has done and that he's worth hoping in. So these first couple verses really talk about confidence. So the first phrase there, the Lord is my light and salvation. Let's focus on light. Not only is God the giver of light, in Genesis 1:1, God said, let there be light. Not only is he the giver of light in creation, but he is also the giver of light by opening our eyes to salvation, to opening our hearts to the truth. But also, in addition to these things, God is also himself light. That's what it says here. He is light. And so, in the same way, not only is God not only just the giver of salvation through Jesus, he is salvation. So let's look at this word salvation. So in the Hebrew, actually, I'm not usually a biblical languages guy, but I thought this was an interesting thing to point out. So in Hebrew, the word for salvation is yesha. And that root word is yasha. And this means to save or to redeem or to deliver from. So you're like, yeah, I know, it says it right there. So why am I telling you this? In the Old Testament, there was a character in the Old Testament, and his name was, for us, Joshua. And Joshua, he helped bring Israel to the Promised Land, and his name, how the Israelites would have said it, was Yeshua. Yeshua. Do you want to know who else in the Bible had that same name? Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, Jesus had that name. So obviously for us, Jesus is totally not Yeshua, but that's because of the Greek-speaking Romans, or the Latin Greek-speaking. But at the time, Jesus' disciples, they would have called him Yeshua. So it's interesting that God used this word that is used of salvation in the Old Testament, and that was Jesus' name. And that is, I think it shows the personalness of God. It shows that he was there, and that was an intentional thing. So moving on to the next part of this verse, you say, of whom shall I fear? Or whom shall I be afraid? I think I just switched those. But that's a rhetorical question, because obviously this verse is begging you to say, well, no one. You shouldn't be afraid of anyone, because God is your light and salvation. This shows that David's confidence, his confidence is in God's protection, is in God's providence, is in God's care for him. Remember, this is the same man who faced Goliath, probably not too long before this. The most terrifying warrior that anyone had ever seen. And with God behind him and total faith and trust in God, that fear was gone. He had total trust. He had total confidence that God was going to deliver. So David had already been in many fearful situations, and God had protected him. So verse 2 says, when evildoers assail me to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. The wicked assail me. So remember from this that sometimes it's tricky to remember, but we need to remember that the evil, the wicked, are supposed to hate the righteous. It says in 1 Peter 4:12, "Do not be surprised at the fiery trials when it come upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's suffering, that you also may rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed." So in one sense, it's a good thing when the wicked assail, when those that are totally against God are like against you, because it means that you are at least partially in the right. Charles Spurgeon said it this way: "It is a hopeful sign for us when the wicked hate us. If our foes were godly men, it would be a sore sorrow. But as for the wicked, their hatred is better than their love." Okay. So that's just, I think, an important idea. Just remember to pursue God and to forget about where other people's, where their loyalties are, and we need to focus on where our loyalties are to God. So we're going to be skipping somewhat around, but verse 4 is a very encouraging verse, because if you read it, it says something that I think is so important to recognize. "One thing I have asked of the Lord, that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and inquire in his temple." So David desired to dwell in the house of the Lord. He desired to see God's beauty. Those are the two things there. But remember, David lived in a time when there was a temple, and the only person that got to experience God was the high priest. And that was just once a year. And so imagine us now, we have the Holy Spirit within us, those that are believers. And that should really let us recognize, wow, David wanted this so much, and we have it. And we have that. And imagine how much David would have wanted that. So let us not just say, oh yeah, the Holy Spirit. It's 2,000 years old, that news. Now let us hold fast to that and not forget it. An important point in verse 5 that I'll talk about more is verses 5 and 6. They talk about David's confidence of God's protection. Right? They say, yeah, he'll hide me in the shelter of his tent. And in Isaiah it says, under the shelter of his wings. Or he'll raise me up and under eagle's wings. And David here knew God's covenant with him was to continue his line and to protect him. I think this is an important thing to remember. We don't know if David had a son yet at this point, but we knew that David knew, okay, I know that God is going to protect me. He's going to continue my line because he promised, yeah, there's going to be a branch. There's going to be someone to continue this line and to be the Savior and the Redeemer, and that is Jesus. That was God's promise. So it's hard to apply this to us a little bit because you can't just say, well, I'm a king and we don't have the same kingship promise. But there is a verse that I found that I think is really helpful, and that's in 1 Samuel 14. 1 Samuel 14, and really quick, 1 Samuel 14 is Jonathan and his armor bearer, and the Philistines are up against the Israelites, and the Israelites look like they're doomed. They got 600 men, the Philistines got thousands, and it's not looking good. And Jonathan decides he wants to trust in God. And he says, I want to see if God can do something. And verse 6 says this, Jonathan said to the young man, his armor bearer, who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will do work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." So Jonathan has confidence in God. He said, perhaps, or it may be, that God would work to protect them. He knew that God had the power to protect them or to save them or to deliver them. But he had no direct promise that God would make his plan successful. But if we see in verse 7, he felt convicted in his heart to do that. So he chose to act with the knowledge that God could use him, with the idea, hey, God could use me, and I just want to trust in that. I think that's a really helpful place to be at. This should be our attitude with God. Our hope should not be in God protecting us from every trial. God uses trials to teach us many things. You can talk to Joci about her dad. I mean, that was a very, very hard trial in their lives. But they grew so much in their faith from it. And I think her dad would say that he would never want to not be paralyzed now. So eventually in this story, Jonathan won. God confused the Philistines, and there was an earthquake, and the Philistines were attacking themselves, and then the Israelites came, and the Lord won the battle. But that was because Jonathan went and he trusted, and he was like, I don't know, you can do this, but we'll see. That's a leap of faith. But he still had hope that he could do it. So that is, I think, the point that is important to recognize from those two verses 5 and 6. Verse 7 and 8 are really prayers for mercy. Just David pleading for God to answer him. That's so important. Saying, hey, God, seeking him out and just begging him to answer. That's a really important mindset to have. Verse 10, the end of verse 9, by the way, is the same word that I mentioned earlier. My salvation, it's the same one. Verse 10, I really love. I get a little bit, the first time I think I read this, I was getting a little teary when I read that because it just is such a powerful verse. And it says, "For my father and mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in." So David knew that God's love and care goes beyond any human relationship. From our parents, we desire significance. We desire security. So how comforting is it to realize that God can truly fulfill our needs even beyond what we've received in this life? So, it's beautiful. Like, if your parents have been good to you, God can be better, and that's amazing. And if they haven't, God can be better. Verses 11 and 12 talk about just David asking God to deliver them, to deliver him. Verse 11 talks about David wanting to live God's way and not his own. And wanting a level path, a path that is righteous, a path that is true. And because of time, I'm just going to finish with verse 14. Verse 14 says, wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. So it kind of has application here. What does this verse say? What should our posture be in light of these verses? Well, A would be hopeful in God. Have that expectation that he will fulfill his promises. And so obviously it would be important to know what those promises are. To look into what are the true promises of God. Another thing that would be an application from this whole passage would be to pray. Verses 7 and 8 are our prayers, pleading for God. So that's how you can wait for the Lord. You can pray. You can be hopeful. Waiting for the Lord literally could be waiting for God's timing. Sometimes we don't understand. Most of the time we don't understand God's timing. Especially in support raising, that's a challenge because it's like, I think we want this then. But God knows. Any time in my life where I didn't understand what God was doing, I look back later, I'm like, that makes sense now. Charles Spurgeon talks about this passage in this way. He says, wait on the Lord. Wait at his door with prayer. Wait at his foot with humility. Wait at his table with service. Wait at his window with expectancy. Those are the ways we can wait on the Lord. So in conclusion, here's a story. This was from a book by Hampton Sides on World War II. During the Second World War, the United States Army was forced to retreat from the Philippines. Some of their soldiers were left behind and became prisoners of the Japanese. The men called themselves ghosts, souls unseen by their nation. And on the infamous Bataan Death March, were forced to walk over 70 miles, knowing that those who were slow and weak would be killed or left for dead or not let to drink any water. Those who made it through the march spent the next 3 years in a hellish prisoner of war camp. By 1945, 513 men were still alive in the Cabanatuan prison camp, but they were giving up hope. The U.S. Army was on its way back, but the prisoner of wars, POWs, had heard the frightening news that the prisoners were being executed as the Japanese retreated from the advancing U.S. Army. Their wavering hope was, however, met by one of the most magnificent rescues in wartime history. In an astonishing feat, 120 U.S. Army soldiers and 200 Filipino soldiers outflanked over 8,000 Japanese soldiers to rescue the men. L.V. Robbins was one of the rescuers. He described how he found a prisoner muttering in a darkened corner of his barracks, tears coursing down his face. "I thought we'd been forgotten," the prisoner said. "No, you're not forgotten," said Robbins softly. "You're heroes. We've come for you." Often in our life, we start to give up hope. To feel that God has forgotten us, abandoned us to dark and hurtful experiences. But the cross of Christ reminds us, no, you're not forgotten. And the resurrection gives us the hope that someday we too will see our rescuer face to face and be liberated from the distresses of this life. When he returns, we too will hear him say, "I've come for you." Let that be an encouragement for you guys. and also a question. Where's your hope? What does your hope lie in? Let's pray.